Warren Commission, headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, was appointed by the new president, Lyndon Johnson, to investigate the assassination. It concluded that Oswald and Oswald alone shot the president. There was no conspiracy. But doubts remained, and in the mid-1970s, a new investigation by a House of Representatives Select Committee reached a more ambiguous conclusion. Oswald was guilty, but there was a high probability of another gunman in Dealey Plaza. It was from up here on the grassy knoll that a Dallas citizen named Abraham Zapruder inadvertently filmed the assassination. A terrible image of the president's death was preserved for posterity. Zapruder's film, now enhanced by computer, also offers tantalizing clues about the source of the fatal shots. And what of Lee Harvey Oswald? He claimed to be innocent, a fall guy. To use his own words, just a patsy. In the eyes of the American government, he is condemned as President Kennedy's killer. Yet in his own violent death, Oswald was denied the fundamental right of every American, the right to legal representation and a fair trial. At the same time, the American people were denied the right to see justice done in the crime of the century. The trial you are about to see will be as close as possible to a real trial. There is no script, there has been no rehearsal. The judge
guy says it's the strange tales of Paul. He's the guy that's, this guy says is the one that goes in the guy who has this on his website. He's one of the Kennedy researchers. We'll look at his name at the end of this. But he's the one that he called Connor a crackpot, and he doesn't know anything. He's not like that. Paul used to get phone calls all the time. He heard phone calls. He wouldn't talk to anybody unless he
You've been sworn, Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, sir, I have.
If you would, please.
That's Paul.
Mr. O'Connor, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury who you are.
My name is Paul K. O'Connor. I'm of Gainesville, Florida.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you were doing when you were 21 years old?
Yes.
What were you doing?
I was a hospital corpsman, United States Navy. I was stationed in Bethesda, Maryland.
At Bethesda Hospital where the president was brought?
Yes, sir.
Were you present when they brought the president in?
Yes, sir.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your duties were at Bethesda Hospital at that time?
Well, I worked with a partner. We assisted in postmortem. My job in postmortem was to remove the deceased brain.
Are you just a little bit nervous?
A little bit.
Well, I don't blame you. It's all right. Just take your time.
If he was that close to me, I'd be a little worried too.
I'll back off.
Thank you.
We're all in this together, so just take your time.
Speak up just a little bit, if you would, please, Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
As I said before, my job was to remove the deceased person's brain and prepare it for putting it in formalin so it was fixed so that the pathologist could examine it at a later date.
And did you prepare to do that in the president's case?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you see who was in charge of the autopsy there?
Commander Boswell, Commander Humes.
Who was actually had his hands on the president during the autopsy?
Dr. Humes did.
Who else was there in that autopsy room? Describe the scene just so the jury can see it in their own eyes.
Well, you have to imagine what the autopsy room looked like. It was quite large, had an amphitheater. It was used for teaching pathology. The room was filled full of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, high-ranking officers, civilians. It was jam-packed.
Right? Did you? What was the attitudes of the people? Was it calm?
No,
What was it?
it was very hysterical.
Was Dr. Hume receiving any interference in what he was doing?
interfered with constantly, yes.
Who was interfering with what was going on?
Well, there was Admiral Berkeley, the president's physician at the time.
What was he doing?
He just interfered constantly. We'd go to do a procedure, and he'd say, don't do that, let's do something else with the Kennedy family. The family wouldn't like that, or it was on and on like that all the time.
Now, when the president came in, what did you do?
The casket came in approximately 8 o'clock in the evening. They set the casket on the floor beside the table when we opened the casket. Inside was a body bag. The body bag was unzipped. We removed the president's body and placed it on the table.
Did you help do that?
Yes.
Did you have your hands on it?
Yes.
And what part of his body, sir?
His shoulders.
All right, you were at the head.
Yes.
Well, now let's just describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you were prepared to do. What were you prepared to do?
Prepare the body, remove the brain. The
You were prepared to remove the brain?
Yes. You take a small chisel and you pry the cranium loose and open up the top of the skull where you have the dura mater, which is a tough, fibrous membrane that covers the brain. That's then cut with a pair of scissors all the way around, close to where you've done the cutting with the saw. That exposes the whole top of the brain. At that time, you reach in very gently with your left hand, and you pull up the front of the brain and cut the optic nerves and other nerves and veins and arteries that hold and support the cranium, the brain in the cranium.
All right, now, Mr. O'Connor, in this case, we have developed some facts. That when these doctors testified here, came before this jury to testify, they were never shown a brain. Although they were told there had been a brain placed in a bucket of formaldehyde, but they never were shown the brain. Do you have an explanation for that?
Yes, I do.
Would you tell the jury what the explanation is?
The president's brains were literally blown out of his head. He had none.
Are you saying that there was no brain in the
There
president's
was
head?
no brain. There were pieces of brain matter that were inside the cranium, just macerated pieces. Nothing that you could tell one part from the other.
Well, what do you mean there were pieces? How much of the brain was left in the skull?
Maybe a handful at the most.
You mean a full handful or what?
Maybe a half a handful.
Now, did you open the president's brain as you would in an ordinary case?
We didn't have to.
You mean you didn't peel the president's brain back?
No, there was nothing to do. He had a monstrous hole in his head.
And so there was never a cut around or the hole or the brain taken out?
We didn't have to.
Because the brain wasn't there?
The brain was gone for all practical purposes. It was gone.
Well, when these people draw pictures of the brain, when these people say that there were pictures taken, photographs taken of the brain, what do you have to say about that?
They must be talking about somebody else.
Well, were you at the head of the president all during the time the autopsy was
The whole
taken?
time.
When people say that the brain was fixed in formaldehyde, is that true?
No,
Is that a lie, sir?
it has to be. There's no brain.
Thank you, sir. You may examine.
Let me stop it for a second.
Mr. O'Connor, you were 20.
I saw Paul's pictures of the head and the x-rays. There was a huge irregular hole back here. Now this original wound was back here, entrance wound was here, the harbor fragment that was found in the Daily Plaza the next day fits this description of the piece that was the piece of the skull that was blown out when he was shot. And I don't know what happened to Paul's pictures and so forth. He had said, I think, that he was going to send them to the museum in Dallas, or rather, which is in the book depository, and so that's where they may be, but I don't know for sure. But definitely, there was just a huge irregular hole back here, and if you look at the diagrams of this wound that's described in the autopsy, it's over here. But when you look, see the autopsy pictures, you can see the head, you can see his hair, it's combed back, and his head, the right side of the head is there. It looks undisturbed.
Sir, well, how do you explain that? They reconstructed his head afterward to take the
No,
picture?
no. Those pictures I think were taken before. There's a whole, that's another issue in there. See, there were 3 casket arrivals. The first one was the real one that went in, and he was in the body bag and the shipping casket. But remember, he left Dallas
Right.
In a ceremonial casket, not in the body bag,
Right.
and somehow, and it was apparently taken off the plane before they left Dallas. Went with another plane, went somewhere else on the way, supposedly Walter Reed, and the brain was, the skull was mangled, the brain was removed.
Right.
And one of the things you have to remember about these secret societies is they stole Prescott Bush, the Shrub's grandfather stole Geronimo's brain. They robbed his graves. They do, and when you see Eyes Wide Shut, read these autopsies about these secret societies, they do very weird things. And when you watch this film by this Secret Society's Bible Prophecy that's in one of the links here, you'll read about how weird these people are. And I do not put it past them. If they stole Geronimo's skull, and why wouldn't they steal JFK's brain?
Talking about that, what's neighbors, people are searching,
Yeah.
of secrets.
Right, Body of Secrets, that's another one to read.
One at a time, sir.
Okay, here's Pugliose.
21 or 22, I'm not really sure right now.
I have no doubt, Mr. O'Connor, that in a normal situation, it would be you who would remove the brain from the decedent, but this obviously and unquestionably was not a normal situation. You certainly agree with me on that?
Yes, sir.
Is it possible then that the autopsy surgeons would have done this, as opposed to you, in this situation, since it was so unusual?
Well, they did most of the mundane jobs that we did that night.
But they did not remove the brain from the body.
There was no brain to be removed.
The official autopsy report in this case, Mr. O'Connor, dated November the 22nd, 1963, states on page 4, the brain is removed and preserved for further study following formalin fixation. Also, from the surface of the disrupted right cerebral cortex, 2 small, irregularly shaped fragments of metal are recovered. These measure 7 by 2 millimeters and 3 by 1 millimeter. These are placed in the custody of agents Francis X. O'Neill Jr. and James W. Siebert of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who executed a receipt therefor. Now, Mr. O'Connor, 3 surgeons signed their name to this autopsy report. You state none of these things happened.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Now, would you agree, Mr. O'Connor, that the president arriving at Bethesda Hospital with his brain already having been removed is one of the most shocking things that you've ever seen in your whole life?
Not the most, but one of the most.
Okay, certainly one of the most.
Yes.
And it goes without saying that you felt this is something that should have been investigated, right?
Well, I figured it would be.
Okay. In fact, throughout the years, you've often wondered what the answer to it was, right?
Oh, I still have questions.
Now, in 1978, you were interviewed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, is that correct?
That's correct.
And this was a 1.5-hour interview.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, pretty much in depth, right?
Yes,
They wanted to know about your observations that night, right?
Yes.
They wanted to talk to everyone who had anything to do with this night.
That's correct.
Now, Mr. O'Connor, if the president's brain being missing from his head is one of the most shocking things that you've ever seen in your entire life, a matter that you think should have been investigated, certainly. And if they spoke to you for 1.5 hours about your observations that night, why wasn't it important enough for you to tell these people about it?
I was under orders not to talk until that time.
What?
I was under orders not to talk to anybody,
By whom?
but the United States military brought in orders a couple of days after the autopsy, and we were to remain silent.
But you talked to there for 1.5 hours. You told them all types of things in that document.
I received permission from the Select Committee on Assassinations to talk to the Secretary of Navy and Secretary of Defense.
Paul, when I first asked you this question over the phone, did you tell me the reason I never told them is they never asked?
Well, they didn't ask me.
That's why you didn't tell them. So in other words, Mr. O'Connor, even though this is one of the most shocking things that you've ever seen, and you're going to remember it to the day you die, and you feel this matter should have been investigated. If those investigators from the House Select Committee didn't ask you the magic question, by golly, you're not about to tell them. Is that correct?
No, sir, I only asked about the answer what I was to ask, and that was it.
I see.
Elaborate.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. You may step away.
That's the type of person he is. I mean, he's not one of these guys who shoots his mouth off and says all kinds of things. He never talked to anybody unless he knew them.
Have you been sworn, Mr. O'Connor?
Yes, sir, I have.
Thank you. If you would, please.
So he never volunteered things. He was just, a straight kind of guy.
That's confused me though. I
Was-
thought he said there was no brain because it was blown out, and then
No,
I
no.
thought he said it was snatched and that was a hero.
No. The piece of brain that came out was his skull. If you look in the Zapruder film, you'll see Jackie jumps onto the trunk of the car as soon as he's hit. His head snaps
Yeah.
back. She's trying to grab pieces of his brain and that piece of his skull. But that fell off on the street. But his brain was still in there. This was just, this was a whole, bit maybe this size of a fist. That's what it was supposed to be. That's what the doctors and the nurses and the funeral home, the funeral director all described this wound, egg-shaped wound in the back of his head, back here, and then it was this wound right here.
Were the kidneys so powerless that they couldn't say, where's the brain?
I said, the brain has disappeared. It's never found. It's not there. And they just, they killed all kinds they killed 3 Kennedys. They tried to kill Teddy as well.
Right.
A couple of times. They didn't succeed again. But they've killed all kinds of Kennedys, and they just have not been able to stand up to these people because they're so evil.
Thank you for your presentation. I want you to realize that the title of this workshop is Understanding the Murder of JFK. And I saw Mark Lane when he first gave his first presentation in New York City at the JMU Theater, right after the assassination a year later. And I've followed it ever since. The problem that I'm having a little difficulty with tonight, this afternoon, this morning, whatever, is that we're tying in the other murders, which are all suspectable as well, but we're tying in the World Trade Center with it as well. And I will not accept that the 9/11 aspect is all tied into the JFK assassination. There's a lot of loose ends, to say the least, but there's also to go into the object that I'm here is in reference to JFK, so that when you divert into 9/11 as an offshoot of JFK assassination, I will question you.
Okay, well, that's a whole nother lecture.
I know that's a whole nother
And, and you see right here that there's 3 definite, we know were not done by this lone nut that they claimed it was done by.
Exactly.
And there's a connection between Malcolm and these other 3 with Raoul, who was the guy that Spike Lee had in his movie. He stood up, he goes up to Malcolm's little daughter and he says,
I know the facts.
if you've seen that movie, and that's Raoul. And so he's connected to Ray, he's connected to JFK, and then RFK it's this whole same thing. RFK was not killed by Sirhan Sirhan. It was a guy standing
I'm not
behind
questioning
him.
that.
So all
I am
these things.
questioning that you put in 9/11.
Okay, well,
with
that's a
that.
whole nother, I'm gonna say, if you wanna watch my 9/11 lectures, I'm gonna, put your, is your email on there? I'll
Yes.
send it to you. I'll send you the links.
That's, I'm just, unresolved question here about, he said the brain was blown out.
Well,
Paul,
well-
I suspect, as a medic, he probably had experience with high velocity, bullet strikes to the brain. And there's such intense pressure there. You see while the skull is, the bone part is fragile and breaks, the skin around it is not. So what could happen is the bone fragments, we saw the bone fragments in the RF case, in the x-ray there. But those high velocity, you could see, actually, you could see the brain matter just
Shooting out.
spraying out of that radio cavity.
You mean this is a Zapruder film?
Well, yes, it is a Zapruder.
Yeah, that's what Jackie's trying to get, but it's not the whole brain.
Right.
Well, but he said there was about a handful.
Right,
Half a handful.
and the brain was removed somewhere else before it got to Bethesda.
Well, well, see, that, there's a, what I understood by hearing Paul say that, and from my own experience with guns and high what a high velocity projectile will do when it connects with something. I mean, I've seen shoot watermelon, and I've shot jugs full of water.
As it comes out.
That's right. There's such pressure there, a hydrostatic pressure. You know, that whole skull could expand, and then when it contracts, it's like in an accident. You know, you have the coup and counter coup. The brain goes, you know, is struck, and so it's entirely conceivable that we should take Paul literally at his statement that brain was blown out.
No, because the hole was too small. It was this fist-sized fragment.
See, that thing was
But
liquefied.
let me explain, the picture that he had was this huge hole back here, and the reason it was huge is because they had to take the brain out, and that's why they needed a big hole. They had to destroy the wound to fudge the autopsy. They made up a wound that's over here, which he didn't have. The original wound is back here. It's not that big. It's fist-sized. There's a bullet hole right here going in the entrance wound. There's the exit wound back here. The Harper fragment just shows how much of a hole there was, and then some of the brain came out, but not the whole brain, because it was encased in the rest of the skull. It was only this smaller hole in the back of his head when the shot went through. So only part of his brain came out, pieces. The pieces were along the path of the bullet. So not the whole brain, because the whole brain couldn't get out. The hole's too small.
See, I never heard about Paul O'Connor before this.
Right, that's why I did this. I did this because I wanted what Paul said to come out. So I wanted him to go down and be in the part of the history of the assassination of JFK, because he gives us the truth.
What other has the Paul?
Well, he died in 2006. Natural causes.
Oh, okay. Have you seen the Zapruder film?
Oh, man, hundreds of times.
Well,
But we were gonna see
Well,
it.
the whole side of his head lays open.
No,
He falls
it's the
over.
back. No, it's the back.
No, the side comes over like
No, it's this side.
Right.
The guy was right.
And falls over, you can see his brain in the film,
It's not his whole brain. It's just pieces of it.
but it's a big hole.
Oh, no, the hole is this size. The Harper fragment shows you.
Here?
No, it's back here.
Well, then we're not.
The
watching
entrance
same
wound is
film.
here. The entrance wound is here.
Yeah.
The exit wound is here. It's this size. The Harper fragment is this size. That's how big it was. And so some of his brain came out. Jackie tried to grab it on the back of on the trunk of the car.
This fellow had his hand
Oh,
on-
I was actually pointing to him, but
Oh,
you
sorry.
got in the way.
One thing that's always confused me, just how does it figure in? Did Oswald kill Officer Tippit?
Oh, no.
No.
No. And the thing is that supposedly Tippit saw the guys who were in the sewer.
Oh,
Who were on
really?
the other side of the street. And
Uh-huh.
that's why they killed him.
Ah,
And he came out of the storm drain.
No. The guys didn't come out. He apparently saw, or maybe they did come out, but he saw guys in the storm drain.
What do you think about the idea that there was another Oswald dummy?
Oh, yeah, right, that's called sheep dipping.
Yeah.
That's called sheep dipping. They had someone to, but the guy he wasn't the right size. He was bigger. He went to a driving range. He went to buy a used car, and then he went to Mexico. And the whole thing about the guy in Mexico, there's a picture. The guy is not Oswald, obviously, but it's just a crop picture, and they could be walking on anywhere. I mean, it just shows some guy walking on the sidewalk, and it says supposedly he's coming out of the Mexican embassy, or the Russian embassy, or the Mexican embassy in Mexico. But he could be anywhere. It doesn't show a building. All it shows is a guy walking on a sidewalk who doesn't look like Oswald. So it could be the picture could be anywhere.
Are you familiar with JFK, The Unspeakable?
Right. I haven't read the book yet, but I have.
It's really good. But there was supposedly an Oswald in Dallas that got flown out to some air base in Arizona or something, and some guy was a witness, sort of a guy that was on leave, happened to be in the same plane with him.
Right, yeah, I'm sure, yeah, there was a guy who, they had these doubles who did these things so that the guy would get remembered, and his name was Oswald, and he was a nut. Because he did crazy things in all these different incidents to make himself stand out.
Getting back to why. By the way, Kennedy was assassinated on my 12th birthday. 2 days later, I watched his assassin get assassinated. And as a 12-year-old, I thought, there's something really screwy going on here. But the point is that was on Sunday. Is it true that Johnson reversed the order that Kennedy?
Yeah, right. That happened. Right after, very soon after, the whole flow on Vietnam changed. We started sending real troops.
So in other words, Kennedy was the roadblock.
Impediment.
Yes, right. He was a roadblock to the Pentagon for everything.
Well said.
And that's what this, hanging out with Mary Pinchot Mayor, doing LSD and what have you, that's how he got changed around. And he also talked to MacArthur. He and Bobby talked to MacArthur about Vietnam. I don't know, either it was after he got president. I guess it was probably after, but it was very soon after, or between the election and when he was inaugurated. They talked to him about Vietnam, and MacArthur told him, "Don't you dare send troops, combat troops to Vietnam." And that's why they didn't.
Following up on what he said, everybody should make sure you read Barbara Garson's book, MacBird.
Okay, so let me go through some of these.
MacArthur,
Barbara Garson.
General
MacArthur.
MacBird.
Okay, this first one we went to that we're actually looking at, I thought we did, was the whole trial. And it's about 2.5 hours. So this first link, you can watch the whole trial. This is Paul's testimony. This is the Jim Garrison, Oliver Stone documentary, part 1. It's on KPFA. It's an interview of Garrison by Stone and 2 other people in the 80s. So it's before Garrison died. And there's 2 parts, and it's on KPFA. Here's the one on the Kennedy casket conspiracy, because there were 3 casket arrivals. The second arrival was the ceremonial casket. Custer, the autopsy, the radiology tech, was on the way back to radiology to develop films, and he saw Jackie arrive with the ceremonial casket. This was after they'd been taking pictures and the body had been there for quite a while. It came out of the shipping casket and the body bag. But it left Dallas in this other casket that Custer saw come in. Then there was the 3rd casket arrival, and that was the honor guard arrival. But there was nothing in that casket either. And then there's a whole controversy about where the autopsy photographs were taken. That's basically unclear. Here's an article about Curtis LeMay being there. He flew back from Alaska. Here's the link, or the video link to describe the Harper fragment. Ruby worked for Nixon. His name was Jack Rubenstein. He worked for Nixon back in the 40s, doing investigations for him, the test case, and all the other stuff that he got involved with. Beyond JFK, the question of conspiracy. This is the which film this is. Let me just see which one it is.
Do you have a handout of these links?
Well, if we could print it, but I'm gonna send it an email.
Okay.
Oh, this is I think this is the interview of Stone on the making of the film, and this has got all the good details in it, beyond JFK, question of conspiracy. It's the documentary on the making of the film, and he's interviewed, and it's great. It's got all the great details.
People can get their hands on a book by an Italian communist called Fall Guy. It's on Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's the first book that ever came out on the Kennedy assassination, before Mark Lane.
Okay, here's JFK 2, the Bush Connection. This is a documentary by a guy named John Hankey on the assassination of JFK. It talks about Skull and Bones and all these people on Skull and Bones. And the people,
That's about the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr.
No, no, that one's
Right
down
now?
here. That one's down here.
John
This is-
Hankey.
Right, he did both. He did 2.
Oh, okay.
He did both, that's what I'm saying. He redid the, I think, the first one, which was JFK, senior. And there's photos, okay, this one here is Tom Flacco. It's got the photo of Bush standing in front of the book depository. Then there's the Hoover memo, which is the real smoking gun link that brings up Bush's name. And then this one here is the assassination of JFK Jr., full version. This tells about that assassination. That was another inside job. This is a great film. And then let's see, the part on Israel is about wanting the nuclear weapons. He wouldn't give them nuclear weapons. And let's see what else we got here. Okay, here's all the stuff on William Pepper. He's got a 2-part interview on Guns and Butter, in which he goes through the whole story of this book. But that there's also a YouTube of it. I think that's this one, right here. And it's at a bookstore in San Francisco. And it's the same thing as the audio that's on KPFA, but this is the video of it, and it's the whole thing. Then this one here, Summary of the Bush Crime Family. This has got all the crimes the Bushes, going back to Prescott, are involved in. Let's see, that memo. This is the link to the Bush. It's got links to the Hoover memo in that. And then here we get to the hidden and not so hidden messages in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. And there's part where there's three essays. And there's a link to the following essay at the bottom of the page on each one. So this is part 1. I put in all 3, but the link to the next one is at the bottom of the page of each one. Then here's a bunch of links about Mary Pinchot Mayer, about her life.
Mary Mosaics is a really good book too.
Yes.
I recommend that highly. It's a great mystery. It's about Mary's murder and her life and the whole story. It's called Mary's Mosaic.
Oh.
It's written by it's incredible.
Yeah,
It's a great book.
she's the one. Okay, then here's the Oliver Stone 50th anniversary JFK. He was on Democracy Now! With Peter Kuznick a couple of nights. These are the Democracy Now! Links to those, to that, and that was on November 22nd. And this one is, I'm not sure which one, jury verdict to prove CIA killed JFK, I'm not sure which one that is. And then here's the one on JFK's, that's on No Lives Radio, and it talks about this Israel connection, the Zionist connection with this, on the nuclear weapons issue, where they tried to get nuclear weapons and Kennedy said no. Let's see, this is the story. He has on the John Hunt, the son of E. Howard, and he told about what E. Howard Hunt told his son. Okay, here's the one, New World Order, Secret Societies and Biblical Prophecies. This is by this guy named Leonard Ulrich. and it's 2.5 hours. It gives you a great overview of all the secret societies. He gets into 9/11 and the whole bit. So, just you, gentlemen, walking out the door. There's your. Go to this last link here.
You have to end at 10, my friend.
Okay, all right. Go to this last link here, and this has how. This talks about the connections between JFK and 9/11. But this was the
That's
first.
another discussion.
This was the main coup. They tried the coup in the 30s with Smedley Butler. That one failed.
Okay.
The coup took place in 1963, and then the last coup, the finalized of the coup, was 2001. 9/11.
We'll continue.
So watch this. It's a great film.
Are you familiar with,
Ryan was pointing to this. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Ben.
once again,
If people would like to talk about this further, maybe we can get together at lunch and talk about it. And also, I've written something up here, I'd like people to look at it and give me feedback on just a few thoughts on the assassination, if anybody would like.
Yeah, I love it.
You should put your email.
I don't have it now, I don't have the phone.
What do you think about Jim Fencer's work on the Zapruder film?
He's just like an encyclopedia of knowledge.
He believes it's been altered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he'd see, now the one thing with him, I was on his show, he says there was a brain, but there is no brain. I mean, it's,
Okay.
if anybody can find a brain.
Could I, before everybody leaves, I have some other information that might be of use. I, on the 4th of June this year, and I attended the reunion of the first Enterprise and discovered that right across the pier from us, the USS you sort of was attacked by the
Right.
and so that ties into
Well, yeah, it's just not
that's
sorted
another
out.
thing. Once
You too.
apparently Israel has this idea of expanding.
Oh, it's one thing?
Expanding.
Okay.
There are some books here. This is amazing. Guilt by Association by Jeff Gates. This is another one, Taking Sides by Stephen Green. And this is a brand new book published this year by Allison Weir, Against Our Better Judgment. Okay.
This will be up soon on YouTube.
what will be?
This.
Oh, this
Flowers, I'm distracted. I love this.
Great show.
It is. Yeah, thank you.
And the book is online, it's free.
Okay.